Hey guys, I'm learning TFT and I'm sharing my learnings with you so that you can learn and I can learn better as well. In this video, I'm going to go through a detailed analysis of Wasianiverson's Tactician's Cup 2 final day run. I'm going to go through all of his games from day 3 and discuss my learnings, including screenshots of scenarios where he did something that really stood out to me or surprised me that I want to learn from and that hopefully you can learn from as well. If you haven't been following Tactician's Cup 2, Wasian won the final game for the tournament, and it was really close fight at the end. But if you look at the day 1, 2, 3 total, he stood out kind of heads and shoulders above the rest of the crowd. And that's why I wanted to really dive into his games. Before I do that, I'm going to go through the meta mindset of the day, which is ask better questions. This is a psychological, philosophical section where I talk about how to apply these ideas in getting better at TFT in the long run. So if you want to jump straight to the analysis of Wasian's games, feel free to take a look at the timestamp in the description below. So today's meta mindset is ask better questions. This is from a book from Peter Block, where I believe the book is the answer to how is yes. So first quote is, transformation comes more from pursuing profound questions than seeking practical answers. So a lot of times when you think about TFT, if you are seeking an answer like, did I low roll this game for my Morgana reroll, or what's BIS that I can place there, right? That's like seeking a practical answer to a specific situation. But a more profound question might be, was this the right spot to even play Morgana reroll in the first place? When we ask a profound question, it really shifts our perspective, allows us to zoom out and consider questions and answers that when we are just seeking practical answers, we have a very narrow, limited kind of window into whatever problem we're facing. And so it's the profound questions that really open doors and unlock new perspectives that can help us be far more creative in examining the situation that we find ourselves in. Getting the question right may be the most important thing we can do. We define our dialogue and, in a sense, our future through the questions we choose to address. Asking the wrong question puts us in the philosopher's dilemma. We become the blind man looking in a dark room for a black cat that is not there. So when we, again, are asking the wrong question, like, for example, why did Mortdog screw us this game, right? Why did I low roll? It's kind of a pointless question to ask, right? We are the blind man looking in a dark room for a black cat that's not there. Instead, getting the question right, asking a better question, like, okay, what could I have done differently? What was the earliest point that I made a big inflection decision that led to this outcome occurring, right? Asking the right question redefines the way that we kind of can take action to learn from the mistakes that we might have made. And even being able to ask, what mistakes did I made, is a vulnerable question to ask because it acknowledges our own fallibility. And so part of asking questions, as opposed to making assumptions that, oh, we're great and we're an expert at this game, which even the top most elite players don't say, right? They say, I suck, right? Whereas if you're in Diamond and you're low rolling and you're saying like, well, it's the game that sucks, I low rolled, instead of looking inwardly and asking, what could I have done differently, right? Peter Block continues to say, I desire to create a world that will solve for others what I have struggled with so much for myself. This is a broader kind of, I think, motivational question, which underpins a lot of the reason that I create these types of videos. I'm not so much creating these videos to garner a ton of views and generate revenue. It's much more that I have many thoughts and ideas and challenges that I've worked through. And part of the reason I do these meta mindset kind of segments is to share with you ideas that I'm still trying to work through, ideas that have been really effective for me in making change in my life. And I want to be able to share that with you as well. And that can create a sense of connectivity and kind of purpose and meaning that if you are solely trying to solve problems or solely being motivated to act for yourself, that there can be kind of a void or a lack of purpose as a result of that. The value of another's experience is to give us hope, not to tell us how or whether to proceed. And I've talked about this in a little bit of a different angle before, like using a black sheep metaphor, where when you are watching a streamer or when you are watching a video on YouTube on TFT, just because someone else does it a certain way does not mean that that is the best way, like from an absolute global sense, and definitely does not mean that that is the best way for you, because you will likely have stylistic differences, different perceptions of the way the world works, different way that you look at the game itself. And this is for sure true for your life, right? If you are just looking to copy what other people are doing, their value systems, you're not really living for yourself. And furthermore, what works for someone else may not work for you. But part of the reason I think that we enjoy watching streamers, we enjoy watching movies, especially situations, and sports for sure, situations where someone has to face a struggle, right? This is the hero's journey of some obstacle, some conflict that they have to overcome. When we are able to see kind of the height of human spirit and the ability of determination, hard work, belief, hope to overcome some hardship, that is what we really seek, not necessarily the specific situation of how that person overcame that specific problem and then applying that specific narrow solution to our life, right? Like that is far less valuable than the broader kind of human spirit that we see others kind of believe in the building of confidence and self-worth and ability to overcome despite tremendous controversy. A good question to ask is, how will the world be different tomorrow as a result of what we do today? And this question is useful because if what you are doing in your life does not have any scaling effect, does not have any impact in how tomorrow changes for you, that itself is very telling, because you are not necessarily growing or building your life in any certain direction in any way that makes the world better off, whether you're in it or not, or whether your subjective experience of the world can be improved, a way to find more contentment, more joy in the way you live. And so this question can be a really kind of big focusing question that can help us get down to what's really important. And if you even apply this into a TFT context, this hits home for me, where I've been trying to figure out how to dedicate more time into studying as opposed to playing, because playing just kind of feels less like hard work. Because doing deliberate practice, studying, VOD viewing isn't easy. And yet, how will my ability to play the game tomorrow be different as a result of what I do today if I pose that question, right? As opposed to, so asking that profound question, as opposed to saying like, oh, maybe if I just pound away at playing games, like I'll figure it out, right? But when I really ask and get to the root of this question, how impactful will my like kind of TFT knowledge and ability to play the game tomorrow be as a result of what I do today? And I ask that question, if I compare what if I play 3 games versus I spend 2 hours studying, which one's going to be more impactful? I could almost always argue that studying the 2 hours will be more effective. How question one, how do you do it, becomes yes question one. What refusal have I been postponing? So instead of asking, how can I do something? That part of the implication of this question is that in order to do something new that you have not really done before or are uncertain about how to do it, there is almost always an underlying question that is being ignored, which is to do something new, we have to give up something old. So, for example, how do I study more? How can I make a commitment to studying more and VOD reviewing more and learning outside of playing the game? If I transform that question, ask a more profound question, ask a better question, is if I take that there's an underlying assumption that there's resistance for me to do the studying, for me to say no to something else, that I have been postponing the saying no, that actually gets to the deeper kind of root motivation, which is refusing to play more games, refusing to spam games, especially if I am on a loss streak and I'm tilting and I feel like I need to make it up, right? And the refusal I'm postponing is like refusing to say to always go for the next dopamine hit, to just play the next game, to impulsively like queue up and click play now, right? If I can refuse to do that, then it makes studying way easier. The most common rationalization for doing things we do not believe in is that we really desire, what we really desire either takes too long or costs too much. So I know intellectually that just playing more games is probably not going to get me to where I want to go, which is to really get better at the game, to have a deeper understanding of the game, which makes the game more fun, allows me to climb more, allows me to interact with the community more, because doing this type of learning and engaging with the community in this way is more meaningful to me because I'm helping other people with stuff I have struggled with myself. And yet the rationalization for me is that it's too hard, it's going to take too much time, it's going to cost too much like intellectual brain power. And so part of another way of framing this question is the how question number 2 is how long will it take becomes a yes question 2, which is what commitment am I willing to make? So instead of saying like, okay, how long is this going to take? How much is it going to cost? How much money is it going to cost? How hard is it going to be? Instead of asking that, right, which is the kind of the wrong question, which kind of gets us stuck looking for something that doesn't exist. Instead, it's asking, what commitment am I willing to make? How much does it matter to me to get better at TFT, to be able to do these types of videos and do a deep dive as opposed to surface level videos and really share the way I look at the world, what I'm learning at a deeper level with you, and be able to get better at the game, not just right now within this patch, within this next week, but how to actually get better over the long haul, and what's going to make the biggest impact on that, and what's the commitment that I'm willing to make to pursue that end of what I really care about, versus the short-term hits, the dopamine hit of what feels good now, but maybe won't feel so good later, that does not align with my longer-term values. We have time for all that isn't truly important to us, so the question of time shifts to what is important. When we say something takes too long, it just means that it does not matter to us. So be it. Don't do it. And so when we say it takes too long or it costs too much, that's just another way of saying that it's not that important. And yet we disguise that excuse while still saying, oh, it's important to me, like I care about that, but I think it's going to take too long, or it's too expensive, or it's going to take me too much effort to be able to get that. And we're basically saying in our minds, like, yeah, it's important, but it's really not important, right? We're deluding ourselves, we're tricking ourselves. Instead, if we're being honest with ourselves, if we're saying it's going to take too long or cost too much, fine. Just say that's not important enough to me relative to the other things that I would prefer to be doing. And if something is important to us, then we can say, all right, I'm willing to commit to this. And this is the amount that I'm willing to commit to this because it's so important to me. So related to that is, how much does it cost? If we transition that into a better question, is what is the price I'm willing to pay? Or instead of saying, how long is it going to take? It's saying, right, what commitment am I willing to make? And finally, what will matter most to us upon deeper reflection is the quality of experience we create in the world, not the quantity of results. This is a pretty deep philosophical statement, which, if you really meditate on it, and it's also interesting because it's basically quality over quantity, is this idea that what you achieve in life, whether or not you get, like Wasian, hit first place in a cup, whether you win a world championship like dish soap, whether you hit a certain rank or not in TFT, yes, you will be able to say you achieved those things, but the quality of your experience is what really sticks with you. The quantity of how many trophies, I'm sure many of us have a number of trophies from our childhood, whether that's playing sports, doing whatever competitions. A lot of times you maybe felt good about that, acquiring that trophy in the moment, but that doesn't really stick with you. What sticks with you is the quality of the experiences, the friendships that maybe you created along the way, the hardship that you had to overcome in winning a championship, in the kind of belief that you had to create for yourself, the confidence, the hard work that you put in, and the reward of overcoming self-doubt in your mind, right? That is the quality of experience that matters at the end of the day when you look back upon your life. Not so much whether or not you made this much money or you got to this rank in TFT, whether you got this promotion. Like, those things are far more superficial. That, again, goes back to, that's the short-term dopamine hit, whereas the longer-term impact is your emotional state and emotional experience through the journey, as opposed to where you ended up in the destination. All right, so that's the meta mindset of the day. Ask better questions. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on this topic, maybe areas in your life that you can apply these ideas. And with that said, I'm going to jump into my learnings from Wasianiverson on day 3 of the Tactician's Cup 2. By the way, I'll include a link to this page in the description below, and each of these links goes to that specific section in his Twitch stream. So, first learning in game 1, he had this scenario where he could... I oftentimes struggled in these scenarios where you can hold a pair, like let's say this Morgana was not here, whether or not you sell this Nidalee or this Alistar to hold the extra pair, and he did. He sold this to buy this, and then sold the Morgana to buy the Kog'Maw, which indicates to me that even if you don't have the supporting trait units, you would rather buy the pairs first And then if you hit the 2-star, then you could start building the supporting cast around it. But first off, the priority is to get the 2-stars. Seems pretty straightforward, but is something that I still kind of struggle with sometimes. So at this point in the game, he said upward mobility into amp can't be bad. And this generally should be pretty straightforward, like kind of intuitive, but the basic idea here is that if you are given a heavy econ / HP augment like upward mobility, you really need to have a good understanding of what comps you can angle towards to win out, because you're going to basically be full opening your early game to then go into some type of fast 8 usually comp in stage 4 where you're going to be at low HP. And so if you're going to play an augment like this, it doesn't make sense to play it into a comp that has a high top 4 rate but a low win rate. And so knowing like that, a list of the high win rate comps up front makes a lot of sense. And so one way of going about doing that is you could just search by filter by win rate. And here, if you just look at the pick rate of these, 0.43, basically Urgot, Fast 9. This is Rapid Fire Renekton, which is gated behind an emblem, so you can kind of ignore this. And then Amp, right? So from the moment that he's taking this augment, he pretty much knows, like, okay, this narrows down the realm of comps I'm usually going to go for to Urgot and Amp. And on top of that, this was last augment Prismatic. From the moment he took this and he was like, okay, I'm angling towards Fast 8, maybe Fast 9 Amp. He also was already calling out in stage 2, because he knows stage 4 augment, last one's going to be Prismatic. He was already saying, all right, my out at 4-2 is Greater Moonlight or Belt Overflow for Zac. And he was already thinking at this point, with this belt to get Warmog, because Warmog on Zac is extremely good. And he's already trying to think about, how do I cap out this board and play towards that endgame? So he already knew the best augments for the comp and planned for it in advance. He was actively calling out Tactical Anticipation, which I've talked about in a previous video, which essentially is before every carousel, he was already thinking out loud, what's my component and unit priority here? Which is something that I've been trying to do more of. It's a lot easier said than done, especially if you also want to consider spatulas, pans, what your opponents might be trying to angle. So also scouting out other players who are near you in carousel priority, trying to call out what they want, what you want, and how to prioritize the order of units. With 3 Cypher here, this was a really interesting play that I would not have thought of. With 3 Cypher here, he already got some stacks. He's playing against another Cypher player, or another Cypher player is in his pool, ex-Leo here. And he's willing to sell the Nefiri and the Vi here in order to grief the other Cypher player and to guarantee his loss streak. And so normally I would have thought that the Cypher value is more important, but being able to continue this loss streak, he would argue, gives you more Cypher stacks in the long run once you get Cypher back in, because the loss streak magnifies your Cypher value. It griefs the other player, and it allows you to generate more gold for his loss streak, which synergizes really well with the upward mobility, costing 1 less gold to per level. That's a super heads up play. He was very intentional about preserving his loss streaks on 5 loss usually, and oftentimes 4 loss, to be able to generate the most gold possible. This also is very interesting. There were multiple scenarios in this day 3 where he intentionally sold 5-cost pair or did not make a 2-star 5-cost in stage 4 because he thought it was too expensive and would not be able to properly itemize it because he knew what makes the comp work and what doesn't. So in this situation, he has a Viego pair, and as he was doing his roll down, he sold the extra Viego because he said, this is too expensive. What I need in this scenario, going back to his game plan around building around Strat Amp, is with the way he built his items, he wants to build Annie items and Samira items. And because he's building a board around Strategist and Amp, this Viego is unlikely to have much value because he needs both Oxforce and stacks of Oxforce and Techie to be able to take advantage of this, and he's unlikely to have either. So he's basically saying, I'm not going to build this Viego 2. So in this case, he skipped the Viego 2 because he wants to build items for his Samira. And also, by the way, in this case, he actually did hit the Greater Moonlight on 4-2. So he called out in stage 2. My out in stage 4 is Greater Moonlight or Belt Overflow. He hits it. And so actually, part of the reason he didn't build this Viego after hitting this is because he wants to actually itemize the Nidalee 4, which is a huge spike to his board, and an Annie. So he's basically prioritizing the Amp units over the Viego. He said, if I build this Viego, I'm not going to have enough gold. I haven't hit my Annie yet. I still need to hit Echo. I still need to hit Yumi too. There's still a bunch of units on his board that he has not hit, and sinking 15 gold into a unit that he's not going to itemize, he's basically saying that's not worth it. So really keeping an eye out on your 5 costs and not holding them or buying them if you cannot itemize it properly, especially when your trait web for your board is optimizing for other units far more than the 5 cost. All right, game 2. Before picking Flatline here, and he has Rageblade Open Sword available, he scouted the lobby and found that 1 to 2 other players were already, I think one other player had a marksman emblem, and then one other player looked like they were angling AD and possibly towards Vanguard marksman. He said in a vacuum, when he first saw this, this would be a great pick. And yet after he scouted, he found that he did not want to play this with a 1 or 2 other players contesting it. And so there's so many situations, going back to the meta mindset of the day, where we maybe take this without scouting. We end up getting to stage 4. There's 2 other players contesting us. We miss on our roll down, and then we blame Mort Dog because we're like, oh, why did we low roll, right? But so much of it can come down to an earlier point in the game where you made a mistake that maybe you weren't even aware of. But the question that you ask, the difference between saying, why did I low roll or why did Mort Dog fuck me, versus saying, hey, was there an earlier point in the game where a decision I made contributed to the negative outcome that opens your mind to more possibilities? So because he didn't want to play contested in late game, he rolled this and made a different decision. On carousel, and I talked about tactical anticipation, but before the carousel round, he would regularly talk about what component priority. And by the way, so this was his board going into stage 2 carousel. He had Bastion Emblem. So there are a few possibilities that he was considering, but he talked through out loud what his carousel selection, how it would affect his line selection. So he sees here, if I get a pan, then he could angle towards Rapid Fire Renekton. He already has the bow here. He has a Bastion Emblem. And then he said, if I take the Elise off Carousel, he'll have Elise pair, And then he can angle towards Tempo, Bastion, Dynamo, go fast 8, fast 9, and play around that. So at every moment in the game when he has a critical decision to make, he was talking out loud and thinking about how the current decision would affect his game, like in the late game, right? So many times when I am confronted with these situations, I'm just thinking about what's right away ahead of me, and kind of going back to game one where he talked about upward mobility amp at this decision point, and then right after that he was already thinking stage 4, because I'm on a encounter with last augment prismatic, I can play towards a greater moonlight out, right? He was already preparing the game way far in advance, and he's doing this on every carousel round as well. Stage 2 and 3, he spent way more time scouting opponents to determine his line selection than scouting for purposes of winning individual rounds. Now, oftentimes this was also because he was not actively trying to win streak. I think if he was trying to win streak, he would be scouting more for current board strength and how to optimize his positioning. But this is, I think, a leak I have in my game where I'm spending too much time in stage 2 scouting to position as opposed to scouting to determine line selection, which makes my mid and late game far easier. When deciding whether or not to sell or remove her, so in this situation, he hit an Elise to have, I think, off of an orb on creep round. He was trying to decide whether to sell or remove her here. And he was actually leaning towards selling in the beginning, but then he was thinking through, again, doing tactical anticipation. He said, what could I get on 4-2 that would change my decision on whether or not I would consider rolling for Elise 3 versus playing towards just tempo and maybe going fast 9 here. And he asked himself that question, like, should I sell or should I reroll? What augment might change that decision? And then the answer popped up in his head, which is, if I get heroic grab bag off of 4-2, then I would consider re-rolling Elise, which means I should use a remover and not sell it. On 4-2, he scouted after the roll down to see how many high rollers in lobby, which then affected what placement he was playing for, which could affect whether he goes fast 9 or rolls to kind of preserve placements. He saw that 2 players had insane hits. So this is the last place guy, hit a Renekton 2 on his roll down and has like very good items. And then he saw that the second to last place player hit both a Sedge 2 and a Zeri 2 on his roll down. And so then at this point, he was already saying, I'm probably playing for a 7th. He scouted the rest of the lobby and was like, this is the one guy I can beat. And so that would then later guide his game plan on how he would decide to act, right? So that's one thing I don't have included in my game is after key roll down, like, and I think you could do this on after 3-2 as well, especially if multiple players are playing like reroll, for example. You can see how far ahead of tempo they might be and what your spot looks like in comparison and what like kind of cap you're playing towards. This is, I've done this more consistently on like trainer golems, where you are looking for whether someone after augment round like got a circlet where they can play for 10 anima or 10 street demon. But I think just for me, being able to integrate this into my game on a regular basis on like 4-2, 4-3 makes a lot of sense as well, because it definitely can guide your decision on whether you want to roll down more aggressively or kind of greed a little bit more. Stage 4, component anvil. Before he even popped the anvil, he was calling out loud what he wanted before he popped it. So in this situation, he does not have anti-heal. He has an open vest. So he's saying Sunfire, Vow. One consideration is that he has a Renekton. So Renekton does have anti-heal built into his kit. So he was trying to talk through like, okay, would I want Vow more? Would I want anti-heal more? And that just lets you make the decision a lot quicker when you do pop the anvil. All right, game 3 on Crabbrave. The idea here is take advantage of how encounters amplify augment strength. On Crabbrave, you're going to get way more gold, and if you can ask yourself this question, which of these augments benefits when you already can get a lot more gold? So this going long, you get diminishing returns. Bastion Emblem doesn't really have synergistic effects with more gold, but Birthday Present with more gold lets you level up quicker, allows you to possibly go fast 9 on tempo, and basically saying Birthday Present is broken on encounters where you get more golds. B-Day Present on Crabbrave sounds way too nuts, is what he said. Understand 1-star 3 cost versus 2-star 1 cost unit strength for your strongest board, especially which one takes more advantage of your items. I would have put in Kog'Maw 2 and TF here, but he's arguing that Elise with Guardbreaker, because she has the ability to hit multiple units, although I think this is changed in the next patch, that would be stronger than the 2-star Kog'Maw. So again, being able to understand like just unit strength is really valuable. He consistently and actively scouted at start of 2-2 to see what opponents were angling. This was a regular pattern after, I think, each augment. He would scout to see how the augment influenced people's like kind of direction. He was considering how to cap out the board with 5 costs at 2-2. So even though this was his board at this point, he was thinking, okay, what do I want to take off Carousel? Was the question that he was posing, and he was already saying belt for Warmogs for Zac. Like that's what he was already considering. And so this is a consistent trend with I noticed with Wasian when he was talking to himself in stage 2, he was regularly planning out how does he get through each phase of the game and how does he cap out his board, which is why I think he did such a great job at, you see here, you got first. 1, 2, 3, 4 firsts on the final day, is because not only was he thinking about what's strongest board now, but how does he cap out the late game, right? Like what are the outs like Greater Moonlight in the late game that will allow him to cap out his board and gain a strong advantage? And how does he set up and make decisions in the early mid game that allow him to transition into that, while not necessarily sacrificing the present too much? Practicing tactical anticipation prior to carousel round based on whether he wins or loses on 2-3. So in this situation, on 2-3, there was actually a fight that occurred. I don't have the screenshot here. That the battle was actually pretty close, I think. And so he was basically saying, if I win, I want to take tier because, or sorry, he said, if I lose, I want to take tier because he thinks that would angle towards more upside in the late game. Like he can play around Strat Amp, he can play around Vexotech. But belt if I win, because that's going to be stronger now, because then he could slam Warmog, level up, get another 2-star unit, and be able to play for win streak. And so always being prepared, this is a very common trend. He's constantly asking himself, what component do I want depending on if I win or lose? He's preparing for all the possible outcomes so that he's ready to make a decision on the fly and not be kind of surprised or caught off guard. One thing I noticed with Wasian is he did not reposition in stage 2 other than to add more units, scouting purely to see what opponents are angling. So this is definitely one thing I spend way too much time doing that I notice Wasian doesn't really do at all. Just exchange the bandwidth of scouting and positioning in stage 2 for instead being able to do this tactical anticipation, both for the carousel, see what other players are angling, trying to predict what augments, win cons I might have, how I can transition into late game. Building strongest board, balancing front and back line. So here he's trying to figure out what's the strongest board I can put together. And the guiding factor for that was he's basically saying, I need more damage. I need more backline. And so therefore he took out some tankiness, took out the second Alistar 2, put in the Varus and the Jax, which his Hyperfang 3 Exo item was Hyperfang, which allows him to get more damage onto his board. So in this situation, it would be pretty complicated for me to think about like, oh, what's strongest board, right? But he would just ask the question like, what am I missing? What's the gap in my team? And he has so much frontline. He's saying I'm missing damage. So how do I get more damage? Get an Exo type item, get more backline, and that's how he put together the strongest board. Stay flexible within the game plan. So he was in this situation, he was angling towards strat amp. He had slammed blue buff and IE with the intention of going towards Annie with the blue buff, Samira with the IE, being able to go fast 9 with Fire Sale and Birthday Presents, plus this is Crab Rave. But he hit a Z2, and he already has a Ross 2, a Gragas 2, and on top of that, there were, I believe, at least one, if not two other players in the lobby trying to angle strat amp. And so he was, yes, he was angling towards strat amp and had a game plan for it, but he also had backup outs, which is blue buff on Zed is actually quite good. And he already has those Divinicore units. He's reasonably strong now. And so he said, all right, I'll just angle Divinicore Zed because I already have these units in place. The strat amp line is contested, so no need to force that. So staying flexible within game plan, knowing what alternate outs you have. Actively considering if slamming a belt will make fight diff. And this fight was super close at the end, and he was even saying, like, will this belt make fight diff? Like, he started posing that question to himself early on in the fight, and he thought it was not going to end up making fight diff, but it did end up making fight diff, and he said that was a very clear mistake. He was already on one streak. This is a 2 gold difference plus like possibly 1 life difference, right? Later in the game, maybe it could be a 1 placement difference by losing this fight. Knowing when to stop rolling. So in this scenario, he is at level 9. He has a Renekton 2, but knowing what is it that will help your board win and be able to cap out more later. And in this situation, that's kind of going back to the question of what can I do now that will have the most impact later, right? That we talked about in the meta mindset. And in this scenario, it's Garen. If he can get Garen on the board, he can start progressing towards getting a Divinicore mod on Zed, getting a Slayer mod on Renekton, and that would make a huge difference in his cap out potential. Yes, he is 4-2 with a very strong board, and he can likely win right now, but he's also thinking about what will have the biggest impact on the future. So he rolled until he found the Garen, and then he stopped there. And then he consistently made predictions on who will win or lose, who he will win or lose to in stage 4 while scouting, and that guided his decision on how to act, whether he was rolling, whether he was greeting for level 9. This was a pattern that I noticed he did actively through many games, not just in this game. And he was doing that not just for players in his pool either. Because once stage 4 rolled around, he was already thinking, okay, I can beat this player. I will most likely finish the game above this player. I will most likely finish the game below this player. This is how this impacts how much I should roll now to be strong and preserve HP. This is how much it impacts my ability to greed and try to play for first. All right, going back to why he got so many first places here, he's consistently asking these questions that influence his decision-making in the presence to set him up for the highest cap possible later, or in certain situations, the highest placement that he could get, given that he may not have a high cap in that specific game. All right, game 4, component anvils. Again, very actively trying to lose streak against a Cypher player, which oftentimes is basically griefing that player for the rest of the game, right? Because that player, if they get a solid 300 cash out, could very likely place higher than you. But by griefing them here, you are almost like gaining half a place into a placement over them. Even though he's playing Birthday Present again in this game, he has a Yumi 2, could have played a strong board, but is deciding to actively grief. And then in stage 3, he's actively thinking about whether he can build a win streak in stage 3. Given that he does have a lot of items that he could slam, he does have a Yumi 2. But he's asking whether he could full streak stage 3. And his answer to that in stage 3 was that there was a build-above player, there was a quality over quantity player on component anvil start, and so he was not trying to force win streak, so he might as well keep generating gold from lost streak. And part of that question of whether you could build streak or not is whether he wants to greed items or whether he wants to slam items to be able to try to streak. In this game as well, he prioritized Warmog as the single tank item he had with 3 item carry. This seemed to be a common pattern that Wasian have across at least 2 games, where I think he really prioritizes Warmog as a really great cap option in the late game, where even just a Zac 1 with Warmog can be a huge stabilizing force. And this Warmog here is almost like giving you a 2-star forecast in value. I think Dish Soap talked about that before. And lets you deal a lot more damage with your backline, which, especially if you're lost streaking, lets you kill units. So you're not taking that bad losses with this kind of setup. Where you know you can kill units and your front line's not like completely falling apart, as opposed to having kind of balanced 2 tank items, 2 carry items. This also lets you like kind of play for higher cap, because a lot of times, sometimes like on creep rounds, if you have 2 tank items here, you might get like 3 tank components, and then you really don't want to be building like more than 3 tank items in most cases. On this roll down, he decided to skip Koboko 2. Similar to the Viego 2 scenario earlier, he said, I'm playing around Strategist Amp, has this setup where this is Annie items, this is Samira items, and he's saying, I'm still missing my Samira, I'm missing my Annie too. I don't have good items for Koboko, nor do I really want to itemize Koboko because I'm building around Strat Amp. The traits are where my strength's going to be, so I'm not going to build this Koboko 2, is his argument. Know which units are strongest, balancing unit strengths and traits. So in this situation, I would have thought to put Gunblade on the Viego, but I think this goes back to similar logic as to why he did not build Viego 2 in the other game, why he did not build Koboko 2 in this game, which is understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are, and 5 amp Yumi is going to be far more effective than a just 2 golden ox Viego without Techie. All right, game 5. Know when to stop rolling. So in this situation, he's playing Vexotech. He has Vexotech items. And part of the question is, when do you stop rolling? And I probably, in this situation, and I believe he was contested by at least one other Vex player, I would have thought, like, by default, just roll to 0, hit your Vex, and go from there. But he's on a 7 streak, which maybe would have made me want to roll even more to preserve streak. But he's super healthy at 97 HP. And I think the big thing is, if you really think about it, if you roll down here, the odds that you hit Vex 2 are extremely low, which is 12 gold for you to even just buy the units, which leaves you at 30 gold. And on average, at level 8, it's going to take you something like 20 to 25 gold to find 1 copy of your desired forecast without any of them in the pool. And someone else here, I think it's Black Sheep who just hit Sejuani 2 here, also has at least 1 or 2 copies of Vex, I believe. And so your odds of hitting Vex 2 are extremely low. which even if you hit one Vex, this board here is probably stronger than putting in Vex, because you could just blue buff Gunblade the Urgot. Blue buff Urgot's actually quite good. It can farm you items as well. So being able to roll here isn't even that great. So the key question is knowing when do you stop rolling is really important. And on top of that, it's not like his board is horrible. Like, he's unlikely to be able to preserve streak through stage 4. But at the very least, his board seems reasonably strong enough to kill units and take some like decent losses while having some opportunity to farm some components with the Urgot. Game 6, thinking about what augments to hit on 3-2. So at this point, he's also already thinking, okay, what are the outs that I'm gonna hit on 3-2 to help me? In this case, he's playing a Mundo reroll with One for All, and someone else is playing No Scout, No Pivot Mundo reroll as well. He did roll down to about 30, low 30s, and didn't hit that many copies. He's only at 4 copies of Mundo, 4 copies of these. And so in his head, he's already thinking, all right, I'm looking for misconnections, think fast, Starry Night, as a way to kind of make up for the econ loss and the fact that he's contested. All right, game 7, this was his clinching game. Stage 4 Armory. He opened on 2-3 to get tier priority on Carousel. He's playing freestyling and on a 2 loss, so he intentionally put his Zyra in the front, even on 2-3, right? So really keeping an eye on, like, he knew Soju wanted to have tier, likely one of these players may want to get tier, so it's really important for him to at least have a 50-50 chance here. And it was also possible that he played Soju here, so being able to lose on purpose to get Carousel priority was really important. Playing for first, given that was the last game of the tournament, he knew he needed to play for first to guarantee being able to win. And he got freestyling as the first augment. And in his head, normally you would think you would play towards Street Demon Brand here. But in his head, he was already saying, there's no way I win with playing Street Demon Brand because the win rate is quite low. And so he knew he already needed to play towards the higher win rate cap out of Strat Amp. And you'll notice he played towards Strat Amp a lot in this tournament, given that it has one of the highest consistent win rates in the game with a high play rate, which was what we kind of showed here, 0.72. And yeah, like thinking ahead on committing to the right strategy, right? And then same question, when do you stop rolling? Are you strong enough to go level 9 here? He did high roll a Samira at level 8. And normally I would have thought, all right, I'm going to roll to find Nico 2 and then stop rolling then. But especially since he was on a 5 loss and he's low HP. But understanding what your board strength is and how stable you can be in stage 4 is such a differentiating skill factor of like really top challenger players versus, you know, lower challenger players, and, you know, even lower than that, right? So like he knows he can slam Rabadons here, Warmog, Last Whisper, and be relatively stable. Even if he takes his argument was that even if I lose, I'm likely to take a good loss, like closer to 1 unit or 2 unit loss, so like no more than 10 HP loss here, which means he would still be on possibly 2 or 3 lives after that. And he knows he has one of the highest caps in the game. If he can get to 9, hit his Annie 2, Samira 2, then he has a very good chance of winning out this lobby, which at the end of the day is what he was able to do. All right, so that's my learnings from reviewing Wasianiverson's Tacticians Cup Day 3. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of the learnings from Wasian's play that we saw today. Definitely include a timestamp when you add your commentary to it as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.